All right. So I'm Alex Joppie. I'm here with Erin Kasprzak. We are instructional designers in the Center for Teaching and Learning. We are also co-leads of the Mobile Learning Initiative, which deals a lot with classroom response systems. And today we're going to talk about the classroom response system that we have here at DePaul, which is Pull Everywhere. So just a little bit of um, an agenda for how we have this session organized. So Erin's going to spend a little bit of time talking about the pedagogy of classroom response systems. Then I'm going to walk you through the different question types that Pull Everywhere allows you to create and share with your students, and you'll have the opportunity to experience those from the participant or the student perspective. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a technical tutorial for how to actually set these questions up in the Pull Everywhere tool itself. So before we dive in, I'm going to have you try out the tool right away off the bat. So if you can pull out your mobile device, and I would recommend opening up a web browser and going to this address you see at the top of the screen, pullev.com/DePaulCTL, and respond to this question. So we're asking, have you used a polling tool in your class before? And that can be Pull Everywhere, that can be the old iClicker system. You might be familiar with another tool from like Top Hat, or you know, there are very many of these out there on the market. Okay. Give you one more minute to get to the right place and to respond. I see we have 14 participants in the room, including the facilitators, and 8 have responded so far. So that is helping me sort of gauge how long to allow people to get to the right place and input their response. So 10 results. Looks like most of you have at least dabbled in this before, maybe with Pull Everywhere, maybe with another tool. So that's great to see. So we can keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who's going to talk about some of the theory and the pedagogy behind using classroom response systems.
Yep. So a lot of this is coming from one source, but he is the prominent researcher and publisher on classroom response system use in higher education. It's Derek Ruff. He is the head of the Center for Teaching at Vanderbilt. His book was published in 2009, his book on teaching with classroom response systems. So we do have a copy in our library here at DePaul. And if you do go and take a look at it, or if you check it out, one of the things you'll find is that he most of the activities he discusses are modeled around the old clicker systems that are, use those base stations like the iClickers we used to have at DePaul. However, all of the strategies can be applied to the devices, bring your own device systems like Pull Everywhere. We call them BYOD for short. So just wanted to get that out there, and I will provide a link to the, or a reference to the book again later. So one of the key reasons for using classroom response systems is to engage your students. And advantages for classroom response systems are, one, every student can respond, even the quiet students. Secondly, you can then display the distribution of responses for the students, like we're doing right now, like we did for that initial question. And finally, Brough really tries to distinguish that engagement is more than simple participation. He says that engaged students are those who are actively involved in class discussions and who think intentionally about course content during class, and classroom response systems can help facilitate that kind of engagement. So I'm going to go through 3 or 4 different types of general types of activities that Brough talks about, and things that we recommend using Poll Everywhere for. So the first one are some techniques to use for class-wide discussions. This is one where obviously everyone, especially if you're in a larger class, having everyone respond can be really helpful to kind of get that, get the sense of what everybody's thinking. Secondly, if you're discussing perhaps sensitive topics, classroom response systems can help facilitate anonymity so that maybe students can be more honest, because they know that they won't, if you're raising their hand, you know what their answer is, but if they're just typing something into the response system that then just gets posted up on the screen, you don't know who necessarily posted it, kind of like a suggestion box. So here are some of the techniques that Brough recommends. One is kind of like a discussion warm-up. So first, you pose a question, you give students time to think about it, and then you record their answers. And that can be, with a multiple choice response or perhaps with an open-ended answer response. Alex will talk about all these different question types in a few minutes. And then you display those results up on the screen. And that can be an effective way to warm up the class for the class-wide discussion. Then you can start having the students share their reasoning behind their answers. Potentially, you can ask students if there are multiple answer choices. If you've given them multiple choice, you can ask students who answered from the top 2 answers, why they chose the answers they chose. Also, if there is a correct answer, perhaps don't reveal it too soon. Maybe give the students a little bit of time to get their answers in. And finally, like any good class-wide discussion, this is a way to get students engaging with each other. Another device that Brough recommends, and he uses this, I know, in his own classes, he has a couple of specific case studies that he talks about, is to design a question that traps students around a common misconception or ideas that might be intuitive but aren't accurate. And so then what you do is you then ask that question, you get the students to respond, and then you can use the classroom response system to demonstrate in a kind of dramatic way that they're wrong, to increase their surprise. At the same time, you want to plan for an explanation there that's going to be helpful to the students' understanding. So you don't just want to say, aha, you got it wrong, but you also want to make sure that you're helping kind of guide them through their understanding. It can also be productive if you're using this technique to have students share their reasoning for choosing the wrong answer and discuss why that idea is intuitive but not accurate, just to kind of help facilitate that kind of discussion. Another technique that classroom response systems can facilitate is one that I'm sure you've heard of from if you've attended any sort of discussion or active learning type faculty development event, is a think, pair, share. And you can use classroom response systems to facilitate this as well. You can start by asking a class-wide question and then pair the students up, have the students post in the classroom response system, pair the students up and have them discuss the answer, and then perhaps pose the question again and see what the initial answer was, what the second answer, kind of class-wide distribution, if that changes based on the pairing and the discussion afterwards. You can also use classroom response systems for formative assessment. And here we're talking about formative assessment versus summative assessment. The goal of formative assessment is to monitor student learning, to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching, and by students to improve their own learning. Formative assessments can help students identify their strengths and weaknesses and potentially target areas that need work. And formative assessments can help us as faculty recognize where students might be struggling and address those problems sooner. We also talk about formative assessments being low stakes assessments. They might have low or no point value. And we contrast them with high stakes summative assessments like exams, where students are supposed to demonstrate mastery. So Poll Everywhere can be used to pose questions to students and collect answers throughout a lecture or throughout a class period for the purpose of providing real-time information about students' learning, both to the students themselves and to the instructors. And students can use the feedback from these questions to monitor their own learning, and instructors can use the feedback to change how you manage class on the fly in response to student learning needs. So you can identify areas of student confusion. If you ask a question and it really seems like students aren't getting the concept, then you can spend more time on that. Maybe you don't get that kind of confused look on their faces, but you really get a sense that they're not getting it. So this is one way to do that. This kind of feeds into another technique that we call contingent, or Bruff calls contingent or agile teaching, which contrasts from kind of what he terms a ballistic lesson plan, where you kind of design a plan for the entire class meeting, launch that plan, hope it hits its target, and then wait for the exam to know if it hit its target. So, it's to be using the classroom response system to kind of understand where the students are and actually modify your teaching as you go. You can also use a classroom response system like Poll Everywhere that has, especially one that has open answers, to use it kind of like a back channel. I know a lot of times now students are not interested in creating another Twitter account or using their personal Twitter accounts for schoolwork, but you can use Poll Everywhere in a couple of different ways to do a back channel. One, you can kind of keep a general question that maybe is a multiple choice question open, and you can ask students, how well are you understanding the lecture thus far? And the students can change their responses as they go, and you can then keep a monitor where you can see the student responses changing in real time. I understand nothing, I'm following everything, or maybe I'm a little confused. You can then also potentially not display those results to the students. Maybe that's something that you're just seeing yourself. You could also potentially keep an open response type open and invite students to post just any kind of questions or comments as they arise. Finally, and this is perhaps the most fun application for classroom response systems, gamification or competitions. Poll Everywhere's version of this is called competitions. You may have played a version of this called Kahoot with us in the past, but Poll Everywhere has this now built into its own system, so that's really great for us because it means that everything is contained together. Gamification like this can encourage friendly competition among students, which they can often find motivating. It's great for a review session. I mean, you know how to use these kinds of things, but it can obviously increase engagement and liven up class. We use this regularly in our DOTS faculty training, and faculty love it. And then, potentially you can award either prizes or perhaps an extra credit point or some kind of kudos to the winners of those competitions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few best practices for adopting classroom response systems. especially these bring your own device, BYOD, classroom response systems like Poll Everywhere. The first one, because this requires students to bring their own devices, prepare the students to have their devices. If this is something that you're gonna use in class, let students know you're gonna do it, prepare them to have their devices, and ask them to bring their devices charged. Secondly, allow extra time and anticipate technical glitches. Alex will talk a little bit about some of the ways that the plugins can, the PowerPoint or other presentation plugins can cause technical glitches, but also just especially if you yourself as the instructor aren't super savvy with it at the beginning, that can be one place where you might just want to make sure that you add a little extra time. I would recommend assigning class credit for using Poll Everywhere, but not necessarily grades. So maybe don't use it as your quizzing tool, or don't only use it as a quizzing tool. Maybe just use it as a general part of participation or attendance and participation broadly. Space your questions apart. If you're going to use Poll Everywhere within a lecture, intersperse the polls throughout the lecture so that it keeps students engaged throughout the lecture because they don't know when the questions are coming. And finally, explain your rationale. Tell students why you're using the tool, and usually that gets them to buy in a little or a lot more than just because you're using it because it's a fun thing to do. So now I'm going to hand it over to Alex, who's going to talk about question types.
Yes, and not just going to talk about question types, we're going to participate in all of these question types together. So I'm just going to run through them, talk a little bit about how you might use each of them, and but you're going to have the chance to experience these as a student participant would. So first, I'm going back to multiple choice. So we had an example of this in the very first slide where we asked whether or not you had used a polling tool before, but we're doing a couple different things here. So if you still have your mobile device open, you should be taken to this question automatically at the same address. So as soon as this poll gets pushed out, then that page will refresh on the student devices. But if you need to hop back in, it's pollev.com/DePaulCTL. So the name Chicago was first recorded in 1688, where it appeared Chicago, an Algonquin word meaning what? So a couple things I'm demonstrating here that we didn't see before. First of all, you see that there are a lot of answer choices here. So we're not limited to 2 or 4. I have 8 here. I could have kept going, but I honestly ran out of false answer choices. I'm also hiding the responses as they come in. So this is a question that has a correct answer. I don't want to bias students by showing them where their classmates are kind of coalescing, what answer they're coalescing around before I reveal the results and reveal the correct answer. Okay, so it looks like just about everybody is in, so I'm going to go ahead and reveal. Oh, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. I was very surprised to learn this. But yeah, most of you got it right. So yes, the correct answer is onion field, and I can reveal that to the students visually by clicking show correct here. And by the way, you all might have your Zoom interface blocking what I'm showing you over here on the right. You can just click on that and drag it to move it if it's blocking this, because I'm going to talk about this for a second. So this is sort of your control panel when you're running a poll. So I can lock it, unlock it, toggle whether or not I'm showing the correct answer, hide and show responses again, all of that stuff from here. You do kind of need to hover your mouse over here in order for this to appear at all. So if you're wondering where did my control panel go, that's why you're not seeing it. Okay, moving on to the next question type. So you also have the option of doing a clickable image question type. So if you're in anatomy, geography, anything with a visual element, you can upload an image, and as you're seeing on your mobile devices, students have the option to select a certain portion of the image. So I'm seeing responses coming in live. I didn't enable the option to hide responses. So you kind of get a sense of what this looks like, you know, sort of up on the projector as responses are coming in. And for clickable image questions, you actually can define correct answers just as you can in a multiple choice question. But it's a little bit crude because you can only define a square or a rectangle, which doesn't necessarily match the shape of the item that you're trying to highlight. And you see we have a problem here because this marker really should be correct, but it's outside the bounds that I was able to draw in Poll Everywhere. So that part's a little bit imperfect, but something you can also do is show these regions to students before they're clicking. So if you know, I could have drawn a box here, and given students like certain options to select to make it a little bit clearer. In this case, I had only defined the region for the correct answer, so showing the region ahead of time would kind of give it away. So this is a this question type has a few different names. It's sometimes called a brainstorming question type or a ranked choice question type. So you have the option to enter your own response, but as you see other student responses coming in, you have the option to vote up or down on what your classmates are saying. So if somebody else has already entered what your preferred response is, you don't need to enter that again, just vote it up, and then that will rise to the top of the list. So this can sometimes be really useful for like that sort of back channel activity that Erin was talking about. So if you want to ask students, like, what topic is least clear to you? What do you want me to cover again in the review session? This is a really quick way to crowdsource that that kind of information from your class. I can see there is no consensus emerging about the best pizza in Chicago. And I think that's very fitting for what I know about the pizza culture in this city. Everybody has their own opinion about it. Okay, so much as there, and there's downvoting too. Much as I'm fascinated to watch the numbers tick up and down here, we should probably move on to the next question type. So this is just a completely open-ended free response question type. So I'm just asking, what are you most excited for over holiday break? usually takes a little bit longer to get answers in. And you see there's several display options for how this actually appears. I have this set to be a word cloud, but it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't necessarily need to be locked in after I create the question or after I get responses. I can change the visual settings after the fact. So I think this is fun for certain types of questions. You get to see visually if multiple students are using the same words. But if I want to see the responses as they were, I can do cluster, I can do text wall, and then the responses will just come in one at a time. I'm not sure if this is an intentional enthusiasm for dogs, or if you just weren't sure that you had submitted the first time. Again, this is something that you can do anonymously if you want students to be able to share something that's sort of a sensitive topic. Yeah, a lot of ways that you can use this question type. All right, that's not what I want. Moving on, so this is the competitions feature, the gamified version of Poll Everywhere that Erin was alluding to. So I've used this in the past when I was a staff professional on a Explore Chicago class, and at the end of the quarter, we wanted to do a review session where we talked about all of the student-facing resources that we had talked about over the course of the quarter. So I created this little competition. It was originally 10 questions, but I just pulled out 3 for the sake of this demonstration. So right now you should be being prompted to enter a name. This can be your real name or a nickname. And when you're doing this with your students, you can sort of prescribe that however you want, if you want it to be anonymous. I will say that at the end of every question, there is a leaderboard. So it can be kind of embarrassing or discouraging for students if they wind up at the bottom of that. So that's one reason you might want to do a pseudonym. But let's see. So yeah, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll see how well our participants in this session know their DePaul student resources. So let's move to the first question. What is the abbreviation for the department that can set up in-person or virtual conferences to improve the quality of your writing assignments? Is it DWC, CTL, WTTW, UCWBL, Plibafin, or FITS? And you will notice that there is a timer down here. It's not appearing while the Google Slides interface is showing up, but it is showing a countdown clock. You do get more points for the faster you get a correct response, but of course, getting an incorrect response gives you 0 points. So you want to make sure that you're confident in your response before you enter. And it looks like everybody is in. I don't need to wait for the clock to wind down if I see the results down here showing everybody already submitted. But okay, time is up. We'll show the correct response and where everybody landed. So yes, it is the UCWBL, the University Center for Writing-Based Learning. So it looks like not everybody, but a plurality got that right. And we'll have a look at the leaderboard after the first question. All right, so three people tied for first with a very quick response. What is the URL for the website that is a hub for resources to help you be successful at DePaul? studentsuccess.depaul.edu, success.depaul.edu, go.depaul.edu/success, or students.depaul.edu/success. We also sometimes do this activity in small groups, which can, it adds a little bit of chaos to it as participants try to quickly form a consensus around a particular answer. And it's great fun. All right, looks like everybody's in. go.depaul.edu/success is correct. Still a tie for first place. And we have one more question. The Office for Academic Advising Support gives advising services to all students, undeclared students, students with a declared major, or undeclared and exploratory students. All right, looks like everybody's in. I tricked you. Undeclared and exploratory students. So for declared majors, they get their advising through their departments. For everybody else, they can go to the Office for Academic Advising Support. And at the very end, we see an explosion of confetti, and the winner is Sarah. Woo!
So glad I clocked on.
So if I were doing this in a classroom, I might have a fun prize to give away, probably something edible, or an extra credit point or something like that. All right. Any questions on the question types before, or I suppose the pedagogy as well, before we dive into the technical tutorial?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you, I don't know, and maybe this will come out in the technical tutorial, and maybe you've already said it because I came in a little late, but for online courses, can you kind of use this online, even if they're not, synchronous courses? Like, could you have open-ended questions and then come back to those questions at the end, or the next module or something like that?
Yeah, we've had a couple instructors do that. I mean, there are survey tools built into D2L, but sometimes the poll everywhere poll is a little bit more visually interesting. The issue that I see with that is that if you're the first student to look at a page that has the poll, it's not going to show you that much that's terribly interesting. Like you sort of need to prompt students to come back and look at it again after everybody has responded in order for it to be meaningful.
Right. Okay.
But I can show you where you can like pull a link from a particular poll that you could put into D2L.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. You mentioned earlier that you don't recommend this for quizzes or assigning grades, but there are other options out there. I was kind of hoping to use something like this just as a low stakes kind of quiz at the beginning of a class to kind of see if people have read, and to kind of encourage reading before class. Maybe it's just me, but sometimes my students do not read. And so I was wondering if you had any recommendations regarding that, or how to use this to ensure that. If that makes sense.
No, I think that's a perfect way to use it. I think you just don't want to use it as, you don't want students to see this as a punitive experience. Yeah. I think that's really the, yeah. So we also try to get away from using it exclusively or only for attendance. That would be the other thing I would counsel against. But I do think that it really is good for low stakes, and there is a way to get students to register so that you can know who answered which question and how they answered it. So yeah. I think that would be a perfect way to use it, to be honest. Just not weighting it too heavily. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I think I'm going to hop out of the presentation and head to polleverywhere.com. So Poll Everywhere is an independent external instructional technology tool. It's actually used for more than instructional technology. There's sort of the teacher-focused component of it, and then it has a pretty reasonable corporate audience as well. But it's not integrated into D2L. It doesn't have single sign-on with your Campus Connect account. DePaul does have a limited pro license, which I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for the most part, if you're just getting started with it, or you just want to play with it a little bit before you commit to using it in your class, you can just go to polleverywhere.com and sign up for a free educator account. The educator account gives you, even the free version gives you a little bit more features than the enterprise or corporate or personal or whatever the other option is. But once you get logged in, you see something like this. So it puts you into your polls area. If you already have polls, they're listed here, grouped by whatever organization you use to divide them. And then you have this blue create button in the upper left, which is where you get started to create any poll type. So since it's the most common, I'm just going to start with a multiple choice question. And give my answer choices. And I'm just using tab to go between these, and that makes it really quick to populate this with multiple answer choices. And I could keep going, but this is sort of what I have. If I want to designate an answer as correct, I click this check mark. That becomes green. That indicates that there is a correct answer associated with this question. Again, you don't need to do that if you're doing this just as sort of like a discussion, a discussion Kickstarter or anything like that, or an opinion question. You don't need to designate a correct answer. Pretty easy to rearrange these if you decide later that I always have a tendency to make D the correct answer, I should change that around. You'll also notice that answer choices or questions do not need to be text. You have an image option here as well. So if I click this, it'll give me a prompt to upload images from my computer. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And here we go. It shows me the question I just created sort of in presenter mode. One thing I want to note here, when I was running polls from my presentation, they were being pushed to your devices automatically when I opened the particular slide that the poll was on. If I'm not running polls from a presentation, if I'm doing it directly from polleverywhere.com, I need to activate the poll before it'll get pushed to your device. And I would do that by clicking the activate button. So if you're still logged in at, or if you still have this page open, then you should see the question appearing on your device now. You also see some other options in the configure category that we weren't seeing in the presentation view. So the first is how people can respond. I'm not sure I can think of a use case for why you would want to mess with these settings, but if for some reason you wanted students to only be able to respond via text message or only respond via the website, you can deselect one of those options. The audience restriction and identity section allows you to restrict who can participate. So if you want to use this as part of a graded assessment, again, probably a low stakes graded assessment, you can select this to restrict to registered participants only, and then students can't respond anonymously, or they can't respond without associating their activity history with their identity. So you can go back later and see who responded and how. If you're asking something particularly sensitive and you want to be able to assure students that that you're never going to be able to associate their response with their identity, you can select this option to make their responses completely anonymous. And you notice there's a warning here. This is telling you that there is no way to undo this. If you've set a question to be anonymous, there's no way to go back and figure out who said what. So you can assure students that it is technologically not possible for you to figure out who said what. Some more options down here. You can allow multiple responses per student. If you want to restrict them from changing their answer after they've submitted a response, you can do that. This is an interesting option. The show activity title. Some instructors don't like the idea of students just being able to look down at their screen the whole time. Like, if you select this option, do not show activity title on participant devices, they at least need to look up at the screen to see the question, and then they select the answer choice that appears on their device, but they can't see the question just by looking at their own screen. So something to think about. Also want to talk a little bit about the visual settings. You have a lot of options here in terms of how these display to students. And when I say a lot of options, I mean a lot of options. You can control the fonts and colors. You can actually get lost a little bit here if you're one of those kinds of people who likes to customize everything. I happen to think the defaults that Poll Everywhere gives you are pretty good. But if you want to create your own kind of visual brand, your own visual identity, you certainly have that option here. Yep. So once I have everything, discard that, go back to where it was. Once I have everything the way that I want it, I can test. So you don't need to pull up your smartphone or open another tab or anything to see what this actually looks like to students. There's a test environment built into the tool itself, and it'll actually adjust the graph based on your response, so you get to see exactly how it's working. So it shows you both the web view and sort of like a simulated text message view of what students see when they participate in the poll. And then the third step that it gives you here is present. So there's a few ways to present. One of them, I've already kind of been showing you. You just open this page and click the activate button, and then it goes. And that's what this tells you. That essentially says just open this page and press the activate button. You also have options to generate a link or an embed code, and this relates to the question of how you might use this in an online asynchronous course. So I can pull this this link and put it into D2L, and essentially students will just be able to click on an answer choice and display a graph of results to them. And if I want to embed that, say, on an intro news item or in a longer content page where I'm giving them a little bit of an introduction, then asking the class to share their opinion, then I can grab the embed code and bring this into D2L. If you know anything about editing the HTML source in D2L, this should look manageable for you. If you don't know anything about editing HTML source, then you can get in touch with either Erin or your instructional designer at CTL. But this also shows you a preview of what it'll look like. Okay. Okay, I'm going to head back to the polls page and show you kind of a brief demo of looking at a couple other question types. Going to hop into an open-ended question. So you said that was pretty easy, just enter the question and go. But once you're at this step, in addition to all of the settings that you got for the multiple choice question, you also get settings for moderation. So if you enable moderation, you need to approve student responses before they show up in this projector view. And I suppose if I want to be able to demonstrate that, I should activate the poll so that you all can actually enter some responses. You also have a profanity filter that it will try to block offensive words. I wouldn't rely on that too much because students can get creative in how they spell things to try to get around the profanity censor. But if you suspect that you don't entirely trust your students to put a response up on the board without your approval, you can use this option. So the the responses would show up down here. It looks like, yeah, it looks like we haven't had any responses yet, but I would have the option to to approve or reject those here. There we go. There's a response. So, oh, okay, I see what I did wrong. So I have the option here, it's hidden by default. I can put visible and it'll show up. You might want to, if you're doing this, in the projector and in front of the class, you might want to disable the projector when you're moderating, because if I'm projecting this screen, then students are going to see these responses before I approve them. Poll Everywhere also has a mobile app, so if you're logged in on your iPhone or Android device and have the mobile app up, then you can go into the moderation queue and approve responses from there as well. Okay. And then really quick, I'm going to go into setting up a clickable image question. So I just did create, selected clickable image as my question type. And I have the option to upload my own image here, but Poll Everywhere also provides a few sort of standard things that are useful in more than one circumstance. So we've got a world map, we've got sort of a happy sadness chart. So this might be useful in the sort of take the class's temperature question type. So you can have students click, happy, they understand what's going on, they feel confident they're learning. Sad, I'm confused, please go over that again. So as sort of an informal signal of where your students are. You have an XY coordinate plane, you've got anatomy, and you've got a couple maps. So for this, I'm just going to pull in a map. And I just wanted to show an example of how you can set regions. So just clicking on the map will give me a box, and then I can click and drag it and resize it. And if I want, I can give it a title too. I can set correct answers by clicking this checkbox. But you see there's not a lot of control I have in actually defining these regions. I can get, fat rectangles and skinny rectangles, but I can't do much more customizing than that. Okay, I think we're running a little bit low on time, but I do want to show you how you can find the student response history and sort of managing student responses. So I have all of my my questions for this session in this question group. If I click on responses, I can see an archive of the responses. Looks like just about everybody in this session was responding anonymously, but if they hadn't been responding anonymously, I would see their username in this column. I can also archive these. So if I want to run the same set of polls again, and I don't want students to see the the responses from, say, the AM class where I ran the same set of polls, I can click clear and give sort of a title for this session. So then all those responses disappear from this screen, but if I go back in, I have the option of seeing both the results from the current run and the archive. And just a few more notes before we turn it over to questions. And if any of you need to run, you can run. And if you want to hang out and talk to us, you can hang out and talk to us. Just threw in a screenshot here of what the moderation queue looks like on mobile devices, since this was sort of difficult to pull up as part of the demo itself. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Pro license. So we have a limited Pro license. It's not a full site license. It doesn't cover every student in the university. I think our license is at about 2,000 seats per quarter right now. And how this works is as soon as a student responds to a poll once, that student seat is used for the quarter. So the license is very well utilized for classes where students are using poll everywhere over and over again through the course of the quarter. It's not very well utilized for large events where a large number of students or a large number of participants are using it one time and then never again. So if you want to be in the Pro license, please don't take this to a conference and use it for your keynote in front of 500 people, because that immediately uses 500 licenses. So yes, for class use only. If you're interested in being part of the Pro license, just let us know, and we'll have information on the final slide about reaching out to us. The key features of the Pro license is it allows more than 40 responses per poll. If you're on the free version, you get capped at 40 responses per poll. You get the reporting and analytics side of it, including gradebook setup, and you get D2L integration. The D2L integration is very, very limited. It essentially pulls in your class list from D2L, and it allows you to push a grade item back to D2L. All right, Erin, do you want to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, Jess is probably going to post these links also in the chat, but there's a link here to the Vanderbilt Center for Teaching's page on classroom response systems. This is a great resource. Secondly, that's the citation for the Bruff book that I shared. Derek Bruff also has a new book that just came out last month called Intentional Tech, and he references classroom response systems, of course. Again, in here, it's not the primary focus of this book, and I just got it earlier this week, and I was very excited about it. So I know that there will be a few more case studies and use cases in there, specifically probably around bring your own device classroom response systems. Poll Everywhere keeps a great blog as well, so that's another place to look for ideas on how to use the tool. And then finally, on the last slide, information on how to get information about Poll Everywhere at DePaul. You can go to our mobile learning page at go.depaul.edu/Moly. You can email Moly at depaul.edu, which will get you to both me and Alex, or you can email either of us individually. And we will get back to you. So that is Poll Everywhere at DePaul.
All right. So if anybody needs to run, please go ahead and do that. Thank you all for coming. But I do want to mention one more thing about presentation integration, because that was a question that came up. So Poll Everywhere also has, as you saw throughout our presentation, the ability to be integrated into either a PowerPoint, a Keynote, or a Google Slides presentation. That is all done through plugins, so special software that integrates either with the PowerPoint program itself, or in the case of Google Slides, through a Chrome plugin. So we've seen issues in the past where if the version of the software you use when you're setting up your slide deck is different than the version of the software that you're using when you're presenting, that your polls won't load. So my advice on that is, if you want to integrate with your presentation, if you have a laptop, I would recommend bringing your laptop to class and plugging it into the podium rather than using the podium computer, if that is an option for you. If that's not an option for you, you might be able to get to class like 5 to 10 minutes beforehand and actually, you can have your PowerPoint deck set up and ready to go, but when you're ready to actually insert the polls into your presentation, do that actually at the podium computer. And it's pretty simple once you get the once the software is installed, and it should be pre-installed on all of the podium computers, you get this Poll Everywhere tab as part of your presentation software, and you can create a new activity or you can insert an existing activity. So I would do this. It pulls up a list of all of my activities in my account, and I just select which one I want to insert.
Oh, and there are plugins on Alex's, because he's on a PC, it shows plugins for Google Slides and PowerPoint, but if you are a Mac user and you like to use Keynote, there is also a Keynote plugin.
All right, we'll hang out for a little bit and answer any other questions, but otherwise feel free to head out, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to do a question that involves ranking? And what I mean by that is in terms of workflows. The workflow order is this. So I plan on doing this in my sound design classes in the spring. I've talked to Kevin about it. And a lot of the challenges with my students are doing the right things in the right order. Is there a way to rank or say put these four items in order?
There's not a ranking question type specifically. I mean, there's sort of the voting option where, but that's different than like ordering. What I might do in your situation is, depending on like how many options are you thinking of that they need to rank? Probably, or that they need to order, sorry.
3 or 4.
Yeah, so you could probably list all of the permutations, because you can put a lot of options in a multiple choice question. So you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 3, 1, 3, 4, 2. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really smart solution. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Bye, Rob. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, so I have a quick question about the registration and getting students and stuff. So if I wanted to use it like for a low grade, somebody mentioned checking if students have read their assignments, and that would be That would be great. So do I have students register by their full name and then I can see the result afterwards, but it's still going to be anonymous when they do it in class, or how does that work?
So this just changed for us because we just activated the D2L integration. So essentially you would be using it, you'd be getting students registered by pulling the your D2L class list into Pull Everywhere. So I can show you a little bit what that looks like. But we would probably want to work with you individually on that because
okay,
this is a little bit new to us too. So I go to the Participants tab, Add Participants, Connect to LMS, Connect to Learning Management System. And then I can go to Brightspace, which is another, it's also D2L. Don't get me started on why there's two names for the same thing. And then I can import my roster into the system, and then Pull Everywhere will create accounts for all of my students. They just need to go in and set a password. So it's creating accounts for all of your students based on the information that's in D2L. And then when you're actually creating your questions, you saw there was the option to require registration. So you want to make sure that you enable that because you don't want students accidentally responding anonymously without being logged in, because then they don't get credit for participating.
Okay, so they would need to log in every time they, with their password.
Yeah, I mean, they should stay logged in. Like, Pull Everywhere keeps you logged in unless you specifically log out or you use a different device, or before you were using the web browser, but then you downloaded the dedicated app, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would recommend probably if you're using it a lot in class that you might recommend that your students download the app, just because it makes it easy for them to access that from, in class quickly rather than going to the web browser on their devices every time. But
yeah, and if they're logged in, they also see their own response history. And, if you're asking right or wrong questions, it'll give them feedback. It'll tell them whether they were right or wrong, and that can serve as a great study guide for them after the fact.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any last questions, Ingen?
I think I'm good.
Okay.
All right.
No,
I know you had trouble. I remember working with you a couple years ago.
Yes. And I had several problems, but I think I got the answer here. It's probably about different software, that it seems like I have different software on all my computers and the school computers. It's like I'm working with 3 different versions of software.
And we've tried to push both IS and Pull Everywhere on this topic. Like, we've tried to push IS to update the computer images more frequently because they only do it like at the start of the school year.
Right, once a year.
Yeah.
And we've also tried to push Pull Everywhere to make sure their stuff is backwards compatible past a certain, like for 18 months or something. And neither of them will listen to us.
Yeah. No, that's I see that, but it was good. I got an answer. I'm going to try to do it in the classroom, and then I will also try. I also got some new ideas here. I'm always looking for, like, how can I check that they actually did some reading before class? And so and if I have any further questions, who do I get in touch with?
You can email either of us.
Yeah.
You're in management, right?
No, in econ.
Well, okay. So you can also email Josh And then he can always, Josh Lund, who is your instructional designer, and he can always get you, if he can't answer the question, he can also get you in touch with us.
Yeah.
But if you want to use the registration, feel free to reach out to either one of us.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, because it seemed like he knew. I did talk to him. It seemed like he knew some, but he wasn't into the finer details like you guys are.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay. So that was very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's go on, continue with our day. I have to try to figure out how I leave. Okay, there is a leave meeting down there.
And we will end the meeting here in a minute anyway. So
you know what,
it'll kick you out. So.
Yeah, but you know what? Can I ask actually one more question? And that is, the chat. Like, do you talk or do you write, or can you do either? These
for the Zoom. So for the Zoom chat, you can just write.
Yeah. So do you guys read the chat? And
I've been reading the chat while Alex was presenting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's how, just trying to get used to this and thinking that, maybe eventually I'm going to use more of this technology with students.
I know. Everybody's starting to do it more.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your December.
Yeah. You
holiday,
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. All right.